Have you wondered about deducting travel expenses when you're a business owner and maybe even combining a personal trip with a business trip? Hi, I'm Jennie Schottmiller, CPA and family therapist, and today we're going to talk about business travel expenses. I just got back from a business trip that I combined with a personal trip, and I'm going to explain how I did it and what I can deduct. But before we start, you need to know what you can deduct generally if you take a trip that is exclusively for business. A business trip is one that you take for work that isn't personal. It could be traveling to a training, like going to a conference. It could be attending some other kind of event. But for it to be a business trip, there needs to be an in-person reason to go to the location. You can't call something a business trip just because you wanted to go do your work in a different place. So just taking your work with you does not make it a business trip. But if you do have an in-person reason to travel to another location out of town for a conference or an event or a meeting, or maybe to scout out a location that you're going to plan an event for, then you can deduct your airfare to get there and back, or your mileage to get there and back. You can deduct transportation costs around the location. For example, let's say you stay in a hotel that is separate from where the conference is held and you take an Uber back and forth each day. You can deduct that. If you rent a car, you can deduct the rental car, the insurance on the rental car, and the gas for the rental car. If you stay in a hotel or an Airbnb, you can deduct that. Now, it can get a little tricky with an Airbnb or renting another like non-traditional type of location to stay in. But if you're concerned about the price, you can compare that and save for your records the local area hotel prices to show that it's a reasonable price for the area. So we've got airfare, hotel, and the transportation. You can also deduct your meals while you're away. The start time for you deducting the meals is the meal after you leave your house. So if you leave your house at noon, the idea would generally be you're gonna eat your lunch at home, and then your dinner or your afternoon snack will be your first food on the road. If you leave at 6 a.m., maybe you're gonna have breakfast at the airport, but that's before like a usual breakfast time, so that might be okay. Now, for this to all count, it needs to be an out-of-town location, not just I went to the major city near me where I live in a suburb. Going from a suburb to a major city is not considered out of town. For the business meals, I'm going to deduct the full amount in my accounting system, but I'm not going to get a tax deduction for the full amount. I'm going to pay the full amount with my business card, whatever my manner of paying, or if I pay cash, I want to keep the receipts and reimburse myself from the business later. The reason that you can only deduct half of your travel meals is because you would have eaten anyway. You would have had breakfast, lunch, and dinner theoretically at home. But at home, eating doesn't cost you as much as eating on the road typically does. And rather than asking people to prove that they really spent more because they ate out or they bought food in the airport or the hotel where it's pricier, we just say you get to deduct half. But it's really important to make sure that you know it's going to get cut in half by the tax software, because you don't want to only put half of it in your accounting records and then it gets deducted in half again at tax time. So those are my basic travel expenses when I'm traveling out of town for business. The airfare, the hotel, the car, the rideshare transportation around town, and the travel meals. So now let's make it a little interesting and talk about some deviations that might happen. Let's say that because you're going to this city out of town where there's an event or something that you're attending in person, you also want to stay a couple extra days to see the area because you're already there, and why not? Maybe, like me, you have family where you're going. So I'm from Colorado, and I had an opportunity to go to an event in Colorado, and of course, I'm gonna stay a few extra days and see my family. So how do I navigate this for expenses? So now we have a trip that isn't exclusively just a business trip. It's also a personal trip. So we need to figure out, can we deduct any of it? And the way we're going to decide that is by determining whether the trip was primarily for business. A good way to measure that is to see how many days are business days and how many days are personal days. The business days are going to be your travel day out there, your work days there, not online, not doing work, but actually attending an event or a seminar or conference for the majority of the day. And those are going to count as business days. And then your travel day back home is going to be a business day. Any additional days that you stay for pleasure are going to be personal days. I'm going to use my recent trip as an example. On Friday, I flew from Philadelphia to Denver, and that was a business day because that was my travel day to attend the event, to get there. On Saturday, I presented at a retreat and I hung around to answer questions after. That was a work day. And then I get one more day to travel home, but I did not go home until Tuesday. So what that means is Sunday, which was the next day, which I spent with my family, is a personal day. Monday, which I spent with my family, is a personal day. And Tuesday, the day that I flew home, is a business travel day. So I have 3 business days, Friday, Saturday, and Tuesday. And I have 2 personal days, Sunday and Monday. So I would consider that my trip was primarily for business because the quickest I really could have done that, even though I could have flew home Saturday night late if I wanted to, it's not expected that you have to travel the same day that you're actually working. So realistically, it would have been a 3-day trip. I extended it to a 5-day trip, and that was primarily for business. Let's say you have a little bit of a longer trip and see how this would work out. Let's say I had left on Friday and worked and presented on Saturday and not come home to the next Friday. Then Friday and Saturday and the following Friday would have been my work days. And Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday would have been my personal days. So that would look like the trip was primarily for a vacation or a personal trip of some nature. And I would be unlikely to deduct the travel costs. So let's talk about what you can deduct in either situation. In my situation where it was primarily for business and most of my days were business related, I'm going to deduct my airfare because I had to go to Denver whether I stayed extra for personal or not. Let's say I just made a 3-day trip. I could have deducted the hotel Friday night and Saturday night. I could deduct up to maximum 2 nights of hotel because I could have gotten there Friday, stayed Friday night, presented Saturday, stayed Saturday night, flown home Sunday, and that would have been 2 nights. In my case, I actually only stayed in a hotel 1 night and the rest of the time was my family, so I can only deduct 1 night of hotel because that's the only expense that I incurred. For the car rental, I'm only going to deduct a portion of it. I could calculate it based on days. Friday was a half day, Saturday was a full day, and my travel day home was a half day. Or I could calculate the miles that I drove that were business versus personal and allocate the cost that way. And the same with the gas for the rental car, or if I bought extra insurance on the rental car, I would allocate it between personal and business, either based on time or miles. For the travel meals, I'm going to only consider the days that I was working or traveling for business. So on Friday, I left after breakfast. Pretty early, but still after a normal breakfast time. I think I left at 8:30. So I'm not gonna count my breakfast, but I'm gonna count my lunch and my dinner. And then on Saturday, I could count all 3 meals. However, breakfast was provided and lunch was provided, so I didn't really incur any costs. And I can't deduct something if I didn't incur the costs. And then for dinner, I actually ate with my family, so I'm not gonna count that one. For meals on the travel day home, I would count my breakfast and my lunch and my dinner because I didn't get home until I didn't even land until almost 8 p.m. So that would be after dinner time. However, I kind of just ate at my sister's house for breakfast and lunch. So there's not much to deduct there because I didn't have any expenses, but I could deduct my dinner because I did incur that expense. Again, putting all the expense for those particular meals and none of the personal meals into my accounting, and then the tax software will cut them in half. Now let's say you have the situation where it was primarily a personal trip. I have 5 personal days and I have 1 or 2 days that I'm working in person at an event or attending something. I'm still gonna be able to deduct a few of my costs. I can't deduct the airfare because the trip was primarily personal. I can't deduct the hotel because the trip was primarily personal. But if I need to take a rideshare, a taxi, or something to get me back and forth to the conference on the couple of days that 1 or 2 days that I'm working. If I'm required to eat meals and buy meals on site, I can deduct those as business meals. Not really because I'm out of town, but because I'm at a work event and I need to eat during the lunch break, I can deduct those meals. Now they're still only going to be half deducted on my taxes. Fully deducted in my accounting, half deducted on my taxes. Also, if I need to work while I'm away at home, even on a personal trip, and I pay for Wi-Fi, or I pay an extra service to have extra security on my computer while I'm away, or I have to send items home. Like let's say I attend a 1-day conference and there's materials and I decide to ship them back home. That I'm shipping work-related materials, I can deduct that shipping cost. The costs you're usually gonna have when it's a personal trip where you happen to work a couple of days are usually gonna be Wi-Fi, maybe renting some space to work privately while away on vacation, and any kind of like shipping materials, buying pens or paper, or printing services that you have to print while you're not at home. I also want to address bringing along employees. Sometimes people have spouses or children who are W-2 employees of their business. And of course, when you go away, you'd like to deduct as much as possible of the trip. If your employee is a legitimate employee that actually does work for you and needs to attend the conference or event or set of meetings with you, then they can go on the trip and you can deduct their costs for going on the trip. And the same rules apply for them. If there's some extra added on personal days, you would not deduct the cost for those personal days. If you have a child as one of your employees and they just do light office cleaning and shredding and maybe sorting, organizing, and filing away papers, you're unlikely to be able to justify taking them on a business trip because they're not going to do filing, they're not going to do cleaning, they're not necessarily going to do shredding. They could do all of that when they get home. So you can bring along family members to a trip that is just your business trip, and you wouldn't deduct their airfare or the portion of the hotel that was for their stay, and you wouldn't deduct their travel meals. If you have, let's say, an older teenager who actually does legitimate work for you, maybe they do billing or invoicing, and you're attending a conference that they're talking about those kinds of activities as well as others, you can deduct their costs. But you really want to make sure that if this employee was not your child, would you bring them along on a business trip? Or are you really bringing them along because they're your child and you want them there for the few extra days? For example, in the past, I've gone to conferences where my spouse and a couple of my kids came along. And while I'm in the conference, they go off and sightsee and do fun things. And that's great. But even though the kids sometimes do work for me and get paid, then they're not there for the business trip. They're not attending the conference. They have no reason to attend the conference. So I'm not gonna really bend over backwards to try to deduct their costs. I'm gonna go with, I want to say with a straight face, if I ever get audited, that I legitimately deducted the cost that I deducted. So I'm only gonna add costs for a W-2 employee if they really have a good reason to go along for the conference. Now, sometimes spouses own a business together, and this can get very tricky. You could say, hey, I think us as business partners should go to destination location that has really nice beaches, and that's where we should have our annual meeting. The thing is that would you do that if it was not a spouse partner? Like if you were just in business, would you go away? Or would you maybe rent a conference room downtown? Or maybe you would have a dinner out to discuss business meeting, or go to a meeting and then go out to dinner together. That would be a more reasonable cost for business partners. So if you're going to go to a destination that's going to have the look and feel of a vacation, you really want to work hard to make sure you can justify why you went there and not just like to a nice place near you for that event. One way you can kind of structure things so that you can call something a business and have it be legitimately deductible. One way you might consider structuring things, and just plan ahead with this, so that you can call something a business trip and it really does have the look and feel of a business trip, is you could say, let's get together with 3 other businesses, and one of them is going to host an event. We're going to have an agenda, and we're going to have 3 days of work days that are 6 hours-ish, And we're gonna go through what it means to run your business, issues related to having partnerships, and legitimate business topics, and go to a reasonable location that seems like a place people would go for a business trip. Ultimately, if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, the IRS can figure out it's a duck. So don't work too hard to make something that looks like a vacation be a business trip. If it's a business trip, you will have documentation such as an agenda, days, rented space, things that you can show we went there in person and did work related to our business, and we didn't just go away because we're a couple as well as partners. Couples can go on vacations, partners can go on business trips, but is it very clear that this is business related and not personal related? And if it's not clear, then I would not deduct that. Let's say you have some colleagues that you want to take a business trip with and you want to deduct the travel costs, but there isn't a specific event like you want scheduled anywhere. One of you could create one, and you're gonna record the income that you receive from hosting the event, as well as deduct the cost of renting the space and any speakers that you pay or other costs that you incur to print materials. You'll have the event, you'll document when you start, the topics you cover, what activities you engage in during the training, and then in the evening, you can go out to dinner, you can sightsee, you can shop. You're not going to deduct costs related to shopping and sightseeing. However, you're in a nice location with people that you enjoy hanging out with, and while you're there, you can engage in some personal expenses while also deducting the majority of your expenses for business. There are special rules if you travel outside of the US. So check out my blog below for that, as well as special rules related to business travel on cruise ships. And check out the simple guide on my website. It's a free membership where you can ask basic questions and read other frequently asked questions that have been asked in the past, as well as my low-cost membership where you can ask unlimited questions.